were we wrong on inflation? What do you think?
A little bit. Underestimated degree to which inflation would remain, and some of the problems. Also failed to predict Omicron as well. I think was a big part of that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I was certainly wrong about that. Maybe too sanguine, but the focus of the conversation about inflation. I mean, I don't know how many times you hear the term supply chain now compared to how many times you heard it before. I think that we were right on that. We were right to focus on that. And that continues to be the subject of discussion. And I'm really interested just to know, to see what more we learn about supply chains, because we've learned so much in the past few months, the past 6 months or year. We've learned so much about them that we didn't know before. And, what kind of policies that people, whether they're MMTs or otherwise, come up with to try and manage supply chains better. Because I do think that's a really, really crucial thing going forward, through the pandemic and with the climate crisis as well.
And I think this also ties into a trend that was already there in economics, where economists start to pay more and more attention to the details of the economy. Because basically, like all the macro models, the simplistic macro models failed, right? Like the central bank new Keynesian model, really relying heavily on the labor Phillips curve transition mechanism of inflation, that failed. The money printing model failed after the 80s, I think, right? Like all the sort of big simple models failed, and there was already this trend in economics to dive a little bit deeper into what, the economy is a massive complex system. And I think this plays into that, right? And we've again seen, okay, not many economists predicted this. And so we need to understand better where it's coming from. And I think that was also partly the idea of doing the video with you, where we have really sort of highlighted different channels. And then we can all, and I see lots of people in the chat actually doing that, fervently disagree about which channel is stronger, but we can at least agree that these channels are all a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Any economics that is more focused on institutional detail and what's happening in the real world, I can be convinced of either side on inflation if you give me like a good argument that is based in reality, right? As opposed to some of these models, which maybe aren't always so useful.
Yeah. And before concluding, what I wanted to ask you is like, what I've also seen is like lots of people saying, hey, but what will inflation do next? And will they raise interest rates? And there, what I wanted to ask you, or at least talk about with you, is I think what people don't always understand about economics, and that's partially our own fault, or at least the economists that you have sort of always argued against, and that is that we pretend that economics is like physics. Whereas in this sense, when it comes to prediction, I think it's more like being a political commentator, in the sense that, you can say, oh, there will be a war with Russia and Ukraine, but everybody knows that a political commentator may be super good, but still can be wrong, because there's just so many factors. Like, one, that we don't know, and two, there's complexity, there's this interaction between governments and private sector, and which is extremely difficult to predict.
Yeah, I think it's the paradox, because people always want predictions, but then obviously a lot of the time they're wrong, and then people, get annoyed with experts and pundits for being wrong about them. But I think, the important thing is maybe we should do less predicting. I don't know, maybe we should do less predicting, but the important thing is, whether the analysis that you use to make the prediction is, clear and sensible and reasonable, rather than the prediction itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. And then, like, if I can use that analogy again, you can say, okay, as an expert, or as someone who has studied, maybe I shouldn't say expert, but as someone who has studied this for some time, I think the chance of war between, Ukraine and Russia, like, this is hyperbole, I haven't studied this, is 70%. And then obviously it could still happen, because, 70%, right? And I think maybe we can phrase our inflation forecast in this way as well, right? So the chance that this is transitory, I would say, in the sense that will end fairly shortly after the pandemic, I would still say is 75%. Would you be willing to do a prediction like that as well?
After just saying we shouldn't do predictions, no. But this is a more hedged prediction. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I think. Yeah, if the pandemic is over, I guess it prompts the question of what it means for the pandemic to be over. But I mean, you could say, for example, by the end of the year, will inflation kind of be half of what it is now? I'd say, yeah, there's like a 70%, 75% chance of that.